Freedom flight. That was the phrase people used when Harry and Meghan left the UK in 2020. It had a specific energy to it. The idea of two people escaping something large and constraining, breaking free from an institution that had, in their account, failed to protect them, trading the weight of centuries of royal obligation for the relative warmth and openness of California. In 2020, at least for a significant portion of the global audience, it worked as a story. It made narrative sense. People had the Oprah interview to come, the Netflix documentary, the memoir. The departure looked like the beginning of something. 5 years on, the phrase looks different. Frogmore Cottage is being renovated. Not to welcome them back, reportedly to erase what they left behind.
The final traces of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle from the British royal family are being erased, and this is far more significant than just the destruction of their former home.
The changes being reversed, the rooms being returned to their pre-Sussex configuration, the £2 million of royal-funded renovation being methodically unwound, and sitting alongside that, the observation from one source that even Prince Andrew, who needs somewhere to live and has fewer options than most, looked at Frogmore and decided it was not for him. Freedom Flight meets an empty cottage being renovated back to something that predates it. That is the picture in 2025. And according to a source quoted in royal commentary this week, even Prince Andrew was offered the property and declined to move in, with the observation that the place had been sitting empty for 3 years, and even Andrew didn't think it was fit to live in.
A huge blow-up, a big fight around Harry's plans for summer return to the UK, including spending time at Balmoral, potentially, and reconnecting with the king.
Two things sitting side by side, a freedom flight and a cottage that nobody wants. It is not the most dramatic image in the Sussex story, but it might be one of the most accurate. Tonight we are going through all of it. What is reportedly happening at Frogmore and what the specific renovation choices appear to be communicating. The Geneva appearance and the details that dominated coverage for all the wrong reasons. The security legal battle and why it matters as much as it does. The Project Thaw reconciliation theory and why it keeps running into the same structural wall despite persistent coverage. The tension between Harry's reported desire to reconnect and the operational reality of the Sussex brand's requirements. And the question that sits underneath all of it, whether the freedom that was supposed to replace royal life has actually delivered what the original premise promised and at what cost. Let's start at Windsor, because Frogmore is where the physical story is playing out right now. The cottage has a specific history that is worth stating clearly before getting into what is reportedly happening now. Harry and Meghan moved in as working senior royals, and the renovation they carried out, funded by the institution at a reported cost of around £2 million, was modern, light-filled, and by all accounts personally shaped by Meghan's involvement in the design decisions. It was, by every description from that period, a home she had genuinely invested in, aesthetically and emotionally. The kitchen alone became a reference point in discussions about Meghan's domestic taste. The work that went into that property was not incidental. It was deliberate and personal.
It seems, as it's been revealed through The Sun, that assessments are being made of the property to see if it can be split yet again into either multiple residences, and basically to erase every single trace of Harry and Meghan on the property. And that is a really fascinating.
After the departure, the property sat unused for an extended period. Charles eventually asked them to vacate, and the keys went back to the Crown Estate. Since then, by multiple published accounts, the cottage remained empty. Not renovated, not occupied, simply sitting there. And now, according to reporting circulating across royal commentary, the royal household is not simply leaving it vacant or putting it on the market. Resources are reportedly being spent to reverse many of the changes made during the Sussex years. Upgraded utilities, redesigned interiors, custom additions, all reportedly being unwound as part of plans to return the property to its earlier configuration as multiple staff residences, which is what it was before the Sussexes moved in. The detail that has attracted the most commentary is not the renovation itself. Properties get renovated. Uses change. What the royal watchers have been reading is the specific direction of the renovation, undoing what was done, returning to what existed before the Sussexes arrived, spending money to remove rather than to add. To supporters, it is practical property management. The cottage was always staff accommodation before its conversion for royal use, and returning it to that function makes operational and financial sense. To critics, the choice to spend money actively reversing Meghan's design decisions rather than simply redecorating around them looks considerably more intentional.
Of course, there was a lot of criticism about what Harry and Meghan, let's say, did. They had to add a yoga room, a 5,000-pound copper tub, and all these sorts of things because Soho House, of course, was involved. I still am absolutely flummoxed by Meghan Markle's obsession with Soho House. I feel like I need to stay there one time and maybe, just maybe, I will understand, but I doubt it.
Every alteration being reversed adds to the perception that the royal household wants Frogmore to represent something categorically different from the Sussex era. Not neutral, not simply updated, but specifically and deliberately pre-Sussex. Then, there is the Andrew detail. During the period when Frogmore's future was under discussion, Prince Andrew was reportedly offered the property as a possible alternative to Royal Lodge. He declined. The observation attributed to one source, that the place had sat empty for 3 years and even Andrew had not thought it was fit to move into, has a specific quality that is difficult to ignore. It captures something efficiently. Frogmore is not simply empty. It is unwanted by the people with the most to gain from having somewhere to live. That is an unusual position for a property on the Windsor estate, and it has become one of the more quietly cutting details in the ongoing conversation about what Frogmore now represents. If Palace Insider is giving you the real story that goes beyond the headlines, the like button is right there. It helps us reach the people who want this kind of analysis. Now let's talk about Geneva, because the Geneva appearance is a case study in the gap between intention and outcome that keeps appearing in Sussex public relations.
Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are being erased from the history of Frogmore.
Meghan addressed the World Health Organization in Geneva. Supporters described it as a meaningful opportunity to engage with global health policy at the highest institutional level, and the speech itself received coverage that acknowledged the platform it represented. Critics focused on two surrounding details that have continued to circulate in the weeks since. The first is the audience. One journalist who reportedly attended described attendance as significantly lower than expected. The description that gained the most traction, whether fairly or not, was that there were barely enough people present to fill a British phone box. That line spread efficiently across royal commentary and became one of the most repeated characterizations of the appearance. The WHO is a major institution and the event was formally scheduled. The crowd size question appearing in the coverage regardless of the speech's content is itself the pointed version of the criticism. The observable reality of the room was easier to discuss than the policy substance of what was said inside it. The second detail is the photograph. Meghan was photographed alongside a foreign health official who had previously faced public criticism over reported remarks. Critics argued that a professional communications operation at the level the Sussex brand requires should have run standard background checks before that photograph was allowed to happen. The criticism was not about the meeting itself. Officials interact routinely at multilateral events. It was about whether the vetting layer that would normally prevent an awkward photograph was functioning as it should. Both criticisms point toward the same underlying observation. Operating outside the palace system means operating without the multiple review layers that formal royal engagements carry. Major royal engagements have a checkpoint at every step: communications, logistics, security, diplomatic protocol. Outside that structure, those checkpoints are replaced by whoever is in the room making real-time decisions.
Initially, the house was actually subdivided into multiple sections because it was actually a residence for multiple staff members. So there was a process undertaken to redo the property, make it go from a multiple family residence to a single family residence. And of course, this was to the tune of millions of pounds. Some of those structural changes, these sorts of things, I'm sure were needed to upkeep a property.
One missed detail can become the headline that defines coverage of an event intended to be about something else entirely. Subscribe to Palace Insider and drop your take below. Do you think the Geneva appearance was a net positive or a missed opportunity for Meghan? Now to the security debate, because security is the issue that has quietly become the gateway to everything else in the Harry-UK relationship, and it is consistently underreported in that specific framing. Most coverage of Harry's security legal battles focuses on the legal arguments themselves, what level of protection he is entitled to, what the Home Office's obligations are, what precedent the court ruling set. That is a legitimate frame, but it tends to obscure the more practically significant point. The security question is not just about Harry's safety on any given visit. It is about whether the conditions exist for the relationship between Harry and his country, and by extension his family, to be anything other than what it currently is. Harry has consistently argued that safety concerns affect his ability to visit the UK comfortably. His legal challenges against the Home Office over security arrangements have been extensively documented. Multiple hearings, contested rulings, and ongoing appeals that have occupied a significant amount of his legal team's time and his own public statements. His position is that the risk to him and his family exists regardless of whether he holds working royal status, and that removing protection based on institutional standing rather than individual threat assessment is not a legitimate security policy. Critics take a more straightforward view. The argument from that side is that the level of protection Harry is requesting reflects the specific threat environment that comes with being a senior working member of the royal family. A threat level that is partly generated by the institution itself and by the public profile the institution provides. Leave that role, and the calculation changes. The Crown's obligation to protect British citizens remains, but the obligation to provide a specific tier of protection associated with active royal duties is a different question. The courts have not fully resolved this to Harry's satisfaction. What makes it strategically significant in the current context is not the legal argument itself, but the practical consequence. Security is the gateway to everything else. Longer visits to the UK become structurally possible if the security question is resolved. Attendance at family events, extended time with King Charles during what is now acknowledged as a health situation of genuine seriousness, the kind of informal contact that might allow relationships to repair themselves gradually rather than through formal arranged encounters. All of those things depend on Harry feeling he can be in the country safely and without the constant overhead of managing the logistics of private security at scale. Every time a development in the security dispute is reported, it gets outsized attention in royal commentary precisely because it is not really about security. It is about whether the gateway opens. And until it does, the rest of the reconciliation conversation remains largely theoretical. Now, let's talk about reconciliation, because the theory that quiet progress is being made behind the scenes has been circulating again with renewed intensity, and it is worth examining carefully, both what the evidence actually supports and what it does not. The reconciliation theory has appeared in various forms across the past 18 months, amplified by the same Project Thaw reporting frame that we have covered in detail on this channel. It has appeared consistently enough to have developed its own rhythm. A friendly outlet runs a story suggesting progress. A critical outlet challenges the sourcing, and the wider commentary community divides along the lines it was already dividing along before the story landed. The stories arrive on schedule. The observable reality: no significant reunion, no public rapprochement, no resolution to the legal battles, no visible movement toward the kind of reconciliation the friendlier press keeps describing as imminent, does not change to match them. It has been consistently given oxygen by friendly sources inside the Sussex circle, pushing it into the press, and consistently challenged by the Boshoff and Frolic assessments that the palace's actual internal view is considerably colder than the published narrative suggests. The tension between those two readings has not resolved. It has simply continued generating coverage on both sides, while the observable reality, no significant reunion, no meaningful public rapprochement, has remained unchanged. The argument, advanced by a subset of royal commentators, goes roughly like this. Harry has made public statements on certain issues, most notably anti-Semitism, where the timing or framing appeared to align with themes being emphasized by King Charles around the same period. To proponents of this theory, those overlaps are not coincidental. They suggest quiet coordination between father and son, a testing of the waters, a series of subtle public signals being used to gauge reaction and prepare ground before any larger moves are made. The counter-argument is that the overlaps are exactly what they look like. Two people who share a background, a family, and broadly similar instincts on certain moral questions appearing in the same news cycle on similar themes. Coverage of both of them is extensive and close. Apparent patterns will emerge between any two people monitored at that level of intensity. Whether those patterns indicate coordination or simply reflect shared values in two people from the same household is a question the available evidence does not answer. What most commentators agree on is the simpler version of the picture. Charles, by multiple accounts and by the evidence of his own reported behavior across several years, would like to see his son. He is a father in the late stage of a serious illness who, by Paula Froelich's sourcing from a palace contact, cannot be alone in a room with Harry because every private conversation between them has, in the palace's assessment potentially become material for a future publication or interview. That is a specific and quietly devastating picture. It does not suggest a father who is hostile to reconciliation. It suggests a father who wants it and is navigating the institutional and personal obstacles that make it structurally complicated in ways that simple goodwill cannot resolve. The obstacle that appears consistently in every account of why reconciliation has not progressed is William. As heir to the throne and, in practical terms, as the person managing the day-to-day Sussex relationship from the palace side under the reported fall mandate arrangement, William's position defines what is actually possible rather than what is theoretically desirable. His position on Harry, by every available account, has hardened significantly since the publication of Spare, the phone call he reportedly made to Harry in October 2025, in which he asked Harry to correct the public record about Catherine's portrayal, ended, according to reporting, with Harry stating he could not afford to walk back the narrative he had built. That specific exchange, if accurately reported, is the most revealing thing in the entire reconciliation conversation. Not because it shows hatred or irrevocable damage, because it shows two people making specific and incompatible choices about what they require, and those requirements not currently being compatible with the kind of agreement that would allow things to move forward. For Harry to have the access to his father and to his country that he reportedly wants, something would need to change on the narrative front. A correction, a retraction, or some form of public acknowledgement that the version of events in the memoir and the Oprah interview and the Netflix documentary has not been entirely accurate. That is a significant ask. The memoir sold globally. The interview watched by 50 million people. Walking any of it back publicly would involve considerable cost. For William to permit any form of Sussex proximity to the royal inner circle, he would need to receive something that Harry's post-2020 public record has not provided. Not a private apology, not an acknowledgement between brothers in a room. Something that goes on the same public record that the original claims went on. Both of those requirements are real. Neither of them has been met, and the observable gap between them is not narrowing. That is why the reconciliation theory, despite its persistent circulation, has not yet manifested in any observable development. The desire for it, at least on Charles's side, and reportedly on Harry's, is real. The structural requirements for it to happen are not currently being met by either party. The friendly press coverage of Project Thaw is, as Boshoff and Froelich have both argued from their separate vantage points, closer to a wish being published as news than to a development being reported as fact. Reporting that circulates suggesting Meghan has drawn a firm line on any return to British life, with the children at least, adds another layer to this already complicated picture. Various unverified accounts describe conversations in which returning to Britain was discussed and rejected. Whether those specific exchanges happened in exactly those terms or not, the general picture they suggest is consistent with everything observable about the Sussex operation's direction of travel over the past several years. California is the base. The children's schooling and social world are there. The brand and its operational infrastructure are there. The professional relationships that constitute the Sussex commercial operation, such as it is in its current form, are there. And the premise of the entire departure, the premise that justified every decision made since 2020, was that California would be better, that the life built there would justify the costs of leaving, walking any significant part of that back, returning the children to the British environment, re-exposing the household to British press scrutiny at close range, re-entering any proximity to the institutional dynamics that the departure was explicitly designed to escape, would require a different justification than the one currently on offer. And the Sussex operation has not, at any observable point in the past 5 years, moved toward constructing that justification. The direction of travel has been away, not toward. That is what the evidence actually shows, regardless of what the Project Thaw coverage suggests. Which brings us back to Freedom Flight. 5 years on, the phrase that was supposed to capture liberation now sits alongside a Frogmore Cottage being renovated back to what it was before, the changes being actively reversed rather than simply left. A Geneva appearance where the crowd discussion overshadowed the speech, a security legal battle that has not resolved in Harry's favor, and a reconciliation theory that keeps running into the same structural obstacles every time it gets tested against the documented reality. The Sussex operation generated real numbers in its early years. The Netflix deal, the Spotify contract, the Penguin Random House book deal. Those were not small numbers. They were the kind of numbers that only get written when a major institution has conducted its due diligence and concluded that the commercial proposition in front of it justifies a significant commitment. Spotify, Netflix, and Penguin Random House are not organizations that write 9-figure and 8-figure agreements casually. They did their analysis. They arrived at specific numbers, and then, across a period of roughly 5 years, all three of them arrived at a different conclusion. That collective revision of a commercial assessment is not nothing. It is an industry verdict, delivered independently, by institutions with no particular interest in coordinating their views. That value proposition was the royal connection, the access, the credibility, the titles, and the story that the titles made possible. Three of the biggest players in their respective industries have since arrived at the conclusion that the proposition was not what it appeared to be. The numbers they paid in 2020 and 2021 were not the numbers that the actual commercial performance justified in 2025 and 2026. The security question, the Frogmore renovation, the reconciliation theory, the Geneva appearance, the brand performance. They are each separate stories generating separate commentary, but they are all expressions of the same underlying tension. Harry left an institution that gave him a specific kind of identity, a specific kind of physical and institutional protection, and a specific kind of embedded relationship with his country and his family that existed not because of who he was as an individual, but because of the role he occupied. The California years were supposed to replace those things, or at minimum to make them feel irrelevant compared to what was being gained. The evidence of 2025 and 2026 is that the replacement has been partial. The irrelevance has not been achieved, and the pull toward what was left behind has not diminished in the way that the departures framing implied it should have by now. That does not make the decision wrong. It makes it expensive in ways that were perhaps not fully accounted for in 2020, in categories: relational, institutional, commercial, that were perhaps not weighted equally when the original calculation was made. And the question of whether those costs can be managed over the long term, commercially, relationally, personally, institutionally, is the question that the Frogmore renovation, the empty cottage, the unresolved security dispute, and the reconciliation theory that keeps not materializing are all, in their different ways, continuing to ask. The freedom was real in the sense that mattered to Harry and Meghan at the moment of departure. The costs of it, institutional, commercial, relational, have been accumulating at a pace and in a form that the original premise did not fully account for. The question now is not whether Freedom Flight was the right decision. That question was settled in 2020, and the people who made it are not reversing it. The question is what the next chapter looks like, what it is actually built on now that the original commercial architecture has contracted, what it requires from both sides if the relational damage is to be managed rather than simply extended, and whether the pull that Harry reportedly feels toward his country and his family has any realistic path to expression given the structural obstacles currently in place. On current evidence, neither the California operation nor the palace is close to a working answer to any of those questions. 5 years after the Freedom Flight, the cottage that once physically represented their place in the royal world is being renovated back to what it was before they arrived. The changes undone, the configuration restored, the chapter closed in the most literal sense available to the people doing the renovation. What do you think? Is there a realistic path to any form of meaningful reconciliation between Harry and the royal family, or have the structural obstacles accumulated to the point where the distance has simply become permanent? Leave your honest take in the comments below. Subscribe to Palace Insider so you never miss what comes next. And if this kind of analysis is what you are here for, the like button is how we keep the channel growing and the stories coming. Until then, we will be here for the next chapter. Until then, we will be watching. So will everyone else.